Hello and welcome to a new video. I'm RayznGames, and today we're going to be talking about how to make a fully dynamic real-time weather system. I've been spending some months along this project. Probably the project took simply 1 or 2 weeks. But the entire process of making the video and making the document, actually you can download this incredibly long document that I'm probably showing on screen now, and if you want to do it yourself, just read the document, follow everything step by step, and maybe you get the result. But by now in the video, I'm simply going to explain what I did and how did I do it and how did I achieve every result. With that out of the way, let's get into my finally fully detailed dynamic real-time weather system. I think I need to explain the goals I had with this project. One of the main goals of my project were to create a fully dynamic weather system at which I could choose any kind of weather I wanted from a selection type and make the weather change dynamically without having it switch. So I needed to find a way to lerp all the values and actually get the results I'm looking for. One of the results I wanted to look for as well is that incredible system that some companies have been building over the years, and it's the Puddles system. For example, whenever you have rain, you want puddles to be forming on your surfaces, which means that you need to touch the shader of these surfaces so they can depict the rainy weather they are in, right? I needed control over the time, over the puddles, over the rain streaks, over the rain particle systems, and many other stuff that we will look at right now. So, let's get into it. The first system I actually started making for a little project at school, it was a time system, from which it actually derived into this incredibly weatherable system that I'm making now. But that time system actually worked really simple. We had a timer that was basically counting minutes, and that timer lasted some seconds. Every time we counted 60 minutes, we counted 1 hour, and every time we counted 24 hours, we can count another day, and whatever you want. Something I really wanted to have is to have the sun simply rotate around, something that many people do, and it's actually acceptable. But I wanted to have literal control over it, so if I wanted to change the hours, I wanted the sun to actually replicate the hour I'm putting it into. And that was the main reason I needed to learn how to make this match. And it's not that complicated. Every time the sun moves 1 hour, it has moved 15 degrees on its own circle. Therefore, we can simply map this thing if we know that at 6 o'clock the sun is giving us 0 degrees on the x-axis. We know that if we want it to be 7 in the morning, we can move it 15 degrees along the sphere of the sun, and therefore we have it mapped. I decided that the next thing I wanted to endure was to make the rain happen, so I started wiggling around with a particle system at which I thought, that's not going to cut it for you. So that's why I went out and learned a little bit more about BFX graph, which is an incredible graph for particle systems that Unity has, and I recommend you check it out if you use Unity because it's really cool. And it's GPU based, so it will provide you as many particles as you really want, which is great. Therefore, this part is real simple. I simply had to create several variables on this BFX graph, called, for example, rain amount, and this rain amount would basically decide whether how many particles we would be running at that particle system now. It's fairly simple, it's fairly basic, you can do it yourself, and it's really easy to do. And it's really fun. I basically made a 0 to 100 slider, and then remapped it to have the amount of particles I wanted to 0, and the amount of particles I wanted to have it when it was at 100. And that's it. That's the entire thing. Like, for example, you map it to have 0 particles at 0, and you map it to have 9,000 particles at 100, and then you're good to go. That's the entire VFX graph explained. Such an easy task, right? Well, prepare yourself, because now we get to the difficult part. First off, I started creating a new material, well, a new shader. In this case, the shader was going to be called WeatherableMaterials. This is because I want them to be weatherable. And if they are really wet, they will need to display puddles, and if they are not wet, they will need to be as dry as possible, also showcasing the material itself. With that, let's get on the way. I formed the puddles using two simple noise functions. Well, noise nodes in this case. And using that actually allows me to have a fairly usable gradient noise that makes me have dynamic puddles at any given time by simply changing the tiling of the noise textures and changing whatever I want from it. And I get as many puddles as I want, as big as I want, because with a step node, I can decide how much of that white mask do I want to have. That step node is driven by the variable wetness, or material wetness, at which point that material wetness will basically define how much of the puddles are going to be displayed over the material, which ensures me that I will have puddles at any given time I have wetness. There are two things that happens whenever it's raining, apart from building up water, and is that we have ripples and droplets. A droplet is whenever a drop of water falls on a dry type of surface, at which creates a spot, or a sphere, or a circle on top of it that has some smoothness on it and looks more reflective. That droplet usually dries up fairly quickly because of soil absorbency. What is a ripple? Well, ripples are droplets that instead of falling on a dry ground, they fall in a puddle. And when falling in that body of water, they create a ripple reaction. That's basically the water moving around. With that, we simply need to replicate these two situations, and here you have both graphs. Then we simply need to convert the height to normals and get the normals into our normal map of our material, and we will get as the ripples and the droplets happen. But not only that, you as well need some smoothness on them so they can be displayed properly. I mean, the ripples not, because they are already going to be over the puddles of water. And now look at the result, which is fairly impressive and quite nice. Apart from ripples and droplets, I needed rain streaks, because yes, my mind never knows when to stop with a project. So here we still are. The distortion map is a map that will have green, blue, and red, and these three colors will display up, front and deep, and left and right. So, knowing that this distortion map will make things be distorted along these directions, we can have some rain streaks that we can make in Photoshop with simple lines. You can actually make it a simple line, really. And then simply have them be tiled over time, like falling down on that side. We can use that distortion map over these rain streaks and mixed in a pretty severe fashion, which will eventually allow us to see how the rain streaks are falling in a weekly fashion. Then we need to control a little bit the tiling of the rain streaks if you want them to be a little more thin, more wide if you want them to be longer, how much of the wiggly fashion depending on how big your rain streak is, so you can actually control if it happens or not. You can control as well the strength of the distortion map, so whenever you blend it, you can actually have more wiggly fashion. Well, it's a little bit of playing around with that, a little bit of playing around with everything I've been doing in this project, but I guess you pretty much got the idea of how it's done, and that's pretty much explained, really. And now look at the result. But as you probably know, wherever Rayzn puts his tongue, he sticks to it, and takes too long. That's when I realized that I had to make the skybox. I mean, so close, but yet so far, right? And this is the resume of this project. One of the first things we need is the color blue, and we need to display that color blue on the color of our Skybox shader. It's really important because the sky is blue, so guys, if you want to make a sky red, you can do it, but, you know, just for consistency, we're going to keep it blue. The next most important thing for a skybox is to have some clouds. The clouds I like to make are usually created with noise nodes. I usually mix a simple noise node with some gradient noise nodes, which allows me to have some incredibly good looking clouds. And if you mix them with TAM and you add the wind onto it, we can have clouds that are moving over TAM. And that then, even if we change the wind direction or the wind speed, the clouds will be changing their direction of movement and their speed. After having clouds, we need to color them, and one of the best ways to color them is using the over node and basically tinting the not the alpha part. And with that, we already have a way to maybe color our clouds in the color we desire. I seem to be an unwitted genius who seems to not know how to control the amount of work he needs to deal with. And we haven't yet finished with the clouds, because now we need to control how many of the clouds we have. And that's done with the step node. Basically, a step node, what it does is basically shrinks or expands what the value is. And if the value is a noise node, and if you expand the value, you will probably get everything is covered. But if you diminish the value, you will probably get that nothing is covered. So now we have a control over how much clouds we do have on our skybox. But there are two more things we need to do for our skybox to be looking great. So the next things we need to do is control the horizon color on the morning and on the afternoon. And that's what we're trying to replicate with this. Only the horizon side will be tinted orange whenever we put a slider to 0.5. And whenever we don't put the slider at 0.5, it's not going to be tainted. So we always have a transition if we move the slider from 0 to 1. It's pretty good. And the next and last thing, pretty important, is to see the sun on the sky, because right now, or before, we couldn't see the sun on top of the sky. We simply saw the shadows, and that's not pretty cool. And we want to see the sun, then we simply need to add a few set of nodes that will get a transform position, or maybe a vector free, better said, that will display the sun position over the skybox. We can basically invert the sun position to make the moon. So we have a sun on the opposite side, we have the moon. Finally, the skybox done. But as you probably know, that was not all. Okay, I'm going to stop doing this kind of bullshit. I am really happy to see you around this far. If you made it, you probably didn't, because it's been long. But don't worry, there's more. The first incredible thing we're going to take a look at is the time system. Yes, in this case we called it time handles. We have this system. At the start, the first thing we need to do is basically enable the rotation, so this thing can rotate. We as well calculate the transition times we're going to use for lerping. If I change the time an hour takes in the game, these transitions will change. What we're going to do is basically have fixed update right up here on the top right corner of your screen, so you can always see the reference things we're going to take a look at. The next part of the code is set shader variables. As you probably know, this part of the code is pretty clear onto what it does. It basically sets the shader variables. And the shader variables we're setting up, it's for the skybox. So we simply gather at which direction the sun is looking at now, and we send that thing to the skybox. So the skybox can update correctly the position of the sun in our perfectly and beautiful material that you've probably listened before. The next function we can find in this code, it's called setTime. You probably know what setTime does, but let me open it to you. It sets time. Yes. It basically calculates all the necessary variables that we need to have in order to start the game. So you need to set it up. Which one is the best way? To have something that sets it up for you. Then, inside the rotation and degrees section, we have rotate sun, which basically activates the rotation of the sun, whether we can move it or not. This is only triggered whether we have switched or changed the hour, or it has updated the hour and the sun hasn't updated. So we are always trying to move forward 1 extra hour, and the sun is always going to be trying to catch up to it. As you can see, we're basically lerping the angle. The next thing we have is can rotate. It's basically the boolean that allows the function we talked about before to rotate. Check 360 is another check I did after understanding that I needed to use lerp angle, but in case nothing was working correctly. If anything else, I check 360. It's basically a check that allows me to be sure we are inside or above 360 and correct it if needed. And as you can see, we have one of the most important functions here, run clock, which basically runs the clock, and it simply just goes on. It's a timer. Then we have clock counter, which basically is the counter I've told you about, which enables us to count minutes, hours, seconds, days, years, or whatever you want to count on. The last functions we can see are calculate hour time and calculate day-night transition time. Both of these functions are used for the same purposes. They both serve to calculate how long does a transition should take, and they both take the same input for time. It's how long a transition inside my game of 1 hour should take. The next one does exactly the same, but for the transition of a day-night value. Which means we need to be sure how long does it take for a day-night transition to happen, which in my case, I gave it around 4 hours, which should be 60 times 4. I think it has finally arrived the time to address the big elephant in the room here, which is the weather system code. The start method allows us to start the code and ensures that all the variables are correctly initialized. In this case, I have many last variables that are going to be used for the lerps. In this case, I'm making all the last variables be equal to the target variable. At the end, you can see that I set the day-night value at start. Set day-night value at start basically sets the day-night value of our skybox at the beginning of the game. This variable controls whether to display blue sky, the stars from the night sky and a really dark sky, or whether it needs to display the horizon color because the sunrise is happening, or maybe the sunset is happening. This is basically everything that this variable is controlling. And as before, I'm going to place fixed update method on the top right corner of your screen, so we can take a look at what's going down inside it. The first function we find in fixed update is weather change gather. This function basically enables us to gather the change in the weather. If you change the weather in the enum, this will gather this change and enable all the transitions that need to happen in order to start transitioning to the next weather. Fairly simple. Day-night skybox transitions controls the transition from the skybox. It basically makes the lerp for the day-night transition value and ensures that it can transition smoothly towards the next value. Weather transition does exactly the same as the last function, but for the weather changes. It actually has in-depth functions that work the same way, but for the rain, for the clouds, and for the many other variables we have. Intensity control basically controls the intensity of the light sources of our scene, which enables us to diminish the sun's intensity in case we are at night and increase it in case we are at daytime. Change wetness, as you probably know, changes the wetness from all our weatherable surfaces, which enables us to, in case that's raining, see the rain building up inside the surfaces. And finally, update shaders adds up all the variables we've been modifying and updates all the shaders from the materials, the skybox, and all the variables available to us. This has been a pretty long project. Hopefully you found this journey enjoyable and you've enjoyed yourself watching this video. In case that's this way, I would really appreciate you to like this video and maybe subscribe if you're willing to see more in the future. I have many more things prepared. Maybe you can give me your opinions into what you want to see next. But by now, I think I'm done with this. Enjoy the rest of the video. Have fun, take care, and see you soon.